Hello everyone, Daim Shabazz with Chess Drum here, and today I want to give the solutions to the puzzles I posted on the 12th. The 12th was the anniversary of the Chess Drum, 23 years, and in commemoration of Black History Month, which is the month of February here in the United States, I wanted to present these puzzles to give tribute to players who have made contributions in chess in various ways. But these puzzles are from real games that have been played, and I will give some background information. And then I will show you the position. We will go through the game up to the position and then go through the solution. So on the 12th, I presented a set of puzzles. I posted on the Chess Drum, and I'll show you as we go to the Chess Drum, week 2. This was the post. Most of you may not have seen this post, but I did post it on the anniversary date, and there are 4 puzzles, and the first one is Maurice Ashley. Now, he is an obvious choice for Black History Month, but I included Maurice for a different reason. I wanted people to see Maurice as a player because we know him as a commentator. We know him perhaps as an organizer. He's also been a coach. He's been an author. He's in the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. So his reputation precedes him, but most may have forgotten him as a professional player. I met Maurice in 1989 at the U.S. Open. It was kind of one of those things, you're at a tournament and you pass someone often enough, you might just strike up a conversation. And that's what happened between the two of us. And we started talking, and the vibe was there. It was something about Maurice. And we connected, and we also went through some games. In this picture that you see, Maurice is leaning over the board, analyzing in a post-mortem between R.O. Mitchell, who's wearing the red jacket, and his opponent. Now, R.O. Mitchell, that next year would become the U.S. Junior Champion and also become a master that year. Sitting beside the board is Dr. Kamani Stansel, who would later play in he played in the Dinker tournament as part of the U.S. Open festivities, but then he would later go and earn his PhD in physics at MIT, and he's now a professor. So this is a iconic picture that you may not have noticed on the Chess Drum. And you may have said that can't be Maurice because you're looking at this afro that he has. He had a very proud afro back in those days. But he impressed me quite a bit because he had this passion. You can feel the passion coming from Maurice. And you can also see it in his games. He played with a lot of energy. This position here is a position he reached against Stephen Weiner at the Chicago Open in 2000. And it came from a French defense, French winnower variation, poison pawn variation, to be more specific. And it got to this position. And so we will take a look at that once I go through the other positions. The second player is Amon Simatowe. So this is Amon Simatowe of Zambia, first grandmaster in sub-Saharan Africa. This picture was taken in 2001 by Jerry Bebold, who was a figure very prominent figure in chess as a photographer and one who chronicled the accomplishments of players of African ancestry. And he would take a lot of pictures. And this is one of his classic black and white pictures that he took of Ammon when he was in the United States playing in one of the invitational tournaments. And he was also 19 years old in this picture. He had created a stir at the World Junior Championship. This was in the year 2000 when he came in joint second, and he beat Pentala Hari Krishna in that tournament as well. And so a lot of players were not familiar with this young star out of Africa, but he had been creating waves for a few years on the African continent by winning the African Junior with prodigious scores, winning the Zambian Championship, and many other accomplishments. I learned about him ironically, on KasparovChess.com. When that site came out, there were some articles about African players, and he was one of the players featured on the website. And I started doing research on him, and I was just amazed at his talent. And he certainly made his mark in those days. Later on, he went the academic route. He came to the United States and studied at the University of Texas at Dallas. He then went on to earn some graduate degrees. I believe he did one of his degrees at Oxford. But now he's back in the United States, in the New York area, and he is, I believe, in finance, the finance industry. He is not active at this time, but I believe last time I talked to him, he was working on some literature, writing chess literature. So we look forward to seeing that. So this position is actually from a blitz game at the ICC 2007. And you can see that this position is not going to end well for black. And it is at this point in the blitz game that Semetoe uncorks a gem. And so we'll take a look at that game leading up to this position, and then we'll look at the solution. The next player that I want to present to you is one whom I got a chance to know a little bit in the Chicago area. As you all know, I was born in Chicago, and I started chess in Chicago, and I was in the Chicago scene until I left in 1989. And in those years leading up to the time I left, Morris Giles was wreaking havoc in the Chicago chess scene, winning tournaments and winning games in very spectacular style. He had a very aggressive style, and he played a lot of sharp lines, including the King's Gambit, on a regular basis. And he maintained a rating over 2,400 playing this style of chess. And his, I guess you can say, his proud moment was scoring 9 out of 12 in the US Open in Boston. And I believe that was 1993. And he actually has a game that is well known, beating Walter Brown, 6-time US champion, in a Sozin attack against the Najdorf, where he mated Walter Brown in the middle of the board with a queen sack. It was a beautiful, beautiful execution. And that was kind of his crowning moment. Unfortunately for him, he lost interest in chess and stepped away from the game. And his brother had told me that he tried to get Morris to just spend some time in Boston where his brother lived, and maybe just play some games and just kind of get back into it. But his brother told me he had no interest in coming back to chess. Morris was actually killed in a road accident, struck by a tow truck, and he that was 2012. I happened to have been in Chicago for my father's birthday at the same time that Morris Giles Memorial was being held. And so I was able to attend the memorial, and I was able to write a statement, which you can see here, that was included in the program. And I won't read it here. You can actually go to the post and read it, or you can go and check out his the obituary that I did of him. I actually profiled Morris Giles. Actually, this is a Black History tribute I did of him, but I also did this obituary of him, and that's Morris there. So this is actually his grandfather, Roscoe Conkling Giles Sr. This is the game with Walter Brown that he played, the Najdorf, a very sharp line. And he reached this position. Now, the thing is, this is not the position that I'm going to present to you. But I just want to show you leading up to the the mating sequence. So this is the position he plays Rook H F1. You notice Black's king is in the center, stuck in the center of the board, and there's nowhere to hide. The king side is shredded. You know, all the light squares are just for the taking, pretty much. And so Morris plays Rook H F1, creating a I guess you can say this tomb. The king is now entombed in the center of the board, and so it, Brown tries to somehow solidify his position by placing his clustering his pieces around the king, which is the natural thing to do. But let's look at this very quickly, and then we'll move on to the actual featured position. So Rook F8, Queen H5 check, Rook F7. And it looks like Black is going to skitter the king all the way to the king side and escape. Bishop B3, setting up a deadly combination, which Brown happens to overlook. G6. Now this G6 is a bit puzzling, but I guess he's trying to somehow assemble this attack by sacrificing a pawn and then gaining a temple on the queen. But he's going to get a cold shower the next couple of moves. Queen takes, knight f8. This is what he was banking on. But he's hit by knight c7 check, deflecting the queen and also uncovering the bishop that's on b3. Queen takes. Now queen takes f7 check, sacking the queen. And of course, after bishop f7, bishop would take f7 and that would be mate. So this was a beautiful, beautiful ending, beating six-time champion. And this is a textbook kind of, or a very instructional ending to a combination. So that was the game with Walter against Walter Brown. And in this picture, you see Morris is on the right, doing a postmortem with Charles Lawton. They were playing in the 1982 Masters U.S. Midwest Masters Invitational. It's now the U.S. Masters tournament. And Michael Brooks, a FIDE master, Michael Brooks from Missouri, was also watching the postmortem. So here is the position with Morris Giles playing Billy Callias. Some of you may have heard that name, a young prodigy player out of Munster, Indiana, who had a great deal of talent coming up. And many thought he was going to go far in chess. Unfortunately for Billy, he was stricken by cancer at a very young age, and he received treatments, and they were not successful, and he succumbed to cancer. He was under the tutelage of Richard Verber and got some instruction from Arthur Bisquire as well. And he also had a stint as a professional player playing in tournaments in Europe. At Lloyd Banks tournament, there's a picture of him on the front cover of the Illinois Chess Bulletin playing John Nunn, and that was a poison pawn variation. He always played these sharp lines. He was booked up, so to speak, very booked up as far as the latest theory. And so with Morris Giles and Billy Callias clashing, this turned out to be a Scheveningen Sicilian, and it ended in this position, or this is the position, the key position, and then Morris Giles was able to find the winning continuation. The last player in the last position is Warren Elliott, FIDE master from Jamaica, 8-time Jamaican champion. Here he is pictured on the right, and Jomo Peterson is in the center. Both of them were fixtures on the Jamaican national team. They represented Jamaica in a number of tournaments, including several Olympiad. Now they're bringing in the next generation of talent. This was a tournament at in Chicago, Illinois, at the Chicago McCormick for the North American Youth Chess Championship. This is the position that Warren got against Salah Assad at the 2000 Chess Olympiad in Istanbul, Turkey. This is actually my favorite position out of the four because it took quite a bit of foresight and deep thinking and positional understanding. It's one thing to be able to figure out a combination in a tactical position, but it's one thing to, in an ending, to play a combination that will lead to a long-term advantage in a winning position. And this is what we have here. So these four positions, I will now present the game, I'll present the position, and then I'll present the solution. So here we have the first position. This is Maurice Ashley versus Stephen Weiner. And this was out of a French winnower variation, more specifically the poison pawn. And we will go through the game very quickly so you can see how the position came about. This was a very sharp, well, I guess I can say it was a very fashionable line at this time. I actually played the French defense for a few years, and I just found that it was not really to my style. It's more of a very positional style, but it's a good experience to learn how to play the French. I think it makes your chess much more well-rounded. So here we have the very topical line, the poison, called the poison pawn variation. This is all theory. White gets a couple of pawns on the king side, while black gobbles the central pawns. And as you can see here, white has this H pawn that's already passed. So this is going to play a role in the game, as we'll see. So as you look, as the pawn continues to march forward, it's already at H6. This is obviously something that black has to pay close attention to. Now in this position, black has sacrificed a pawn. And I suppose that black is thinking about the centralized white king and trying to exploit the king's centralized position. It didn't quite work out that way. The queens remain on the board, and now after bishop b5, white has to figure out how to play this position with the king having no shelter. But that being said, white actually castles, and if you look at this position, the white king is relatively safe. There are not many routes to the king. On the other hand, if you look at the black king, it has some issues that it has to deal with. Now you have a rook lift. This rook has lateral potential. So it can go to the c file, it can go to the d file, it can also go to the e file. So lots of possibilities there for the rook. But of course, its main job is to support the advance of the pawn. Now you have a key position. This is not the actual puzzle position, but this is a key position here. Black is forced to play the rook to h8. And now the thing here is this pawn always has to be respected because it's one square away from queening. Now that you're pulling pieces away from the protection of the king, white has to figure out how to strip the defenders away from the king and at the same time make sure that black doesn't get any counterplay. So this is the key position. It is white to move and white to win. So take a few minutes, look at the position, and then we'll come to the solution. All right, so now the key position here, in any chess game, you could have a winning position, but you may not know you have a winning position. And there might be many paths to victory, and you have to choose the right one. And the right move here in this position is queen takes h8. Queen sacrifice. Rook takes. Rook d8 check. What does this move do? This move pulls the rook on h8 out of the path of the pawn. So rook d8 is forced, bishop d8. Now you can see the purpose of this entire combination is that now this white pawn is going to be unimpeded and it will queen. There's no stopping it. Why? Because black has no counterplay. There are no checks. This king that we were talking about earlier is relatively safe. There are no routes to the king. And so, what Weiner decided to do is just go into the end game and exchange down and figure out how to hold on. White gets a queen. The only move is to interpose with the bishop, as any of the king moves here will run into this move, rook h7. So bishop e8, rook h7, queen c4. Another key position. Now, if you try to, let's say, to be greedy in taking the pawn on a7, then black has a lot of checks. There's going to be a lot of checks along the first rank, along the b file, and yes, I mean, you don't want to give any kind of counterplay. And so white plays a killer move, and after queen e5, black resigns. And you look at this position, the threat is going to be queen e7, and then taking the bishop. That's here on e8. Game over, right? So what are some possible defenses of queen e5? Well, black can try to play queen c5, trading off the queens, but that's a completely lost position. White can actually trade the queens and take the pawn on a7 and win easily. But there are a couple of other moves here. There is queen b8. Queen c8 is forced. Then you play queen d6. If you play queen d7, then just rook takes and it's a completely winning position. If you play bishop d7, then rook h8 is mate. So after queen to e5, black resigned because he saw the impending doom and decided to gracefully resign. So that was a very nice game coming out of a theoretical opening, and that was Maurice Ashley in his element. He was indeed an attacking player, and he showed it in that flourish. The second position is Emil Simatowe, who on ICC was known as Solomon's with an S, and he plays this game. And we will look at the entire game and how it unfolded. This looks like an English, and it actually it favors a position that you would get in a Sicilian as well. And we see some elements of the Maroczy bind here, and you can get this from a lot of the Sicilian positions, and it kind of has that feel. Looks like a Scheveningen. And now you see this rerouting the knight to d7. This gives kind of a hedgehog setup. It's not quite a hedgehog because you don't have the pawn on a6. There's usually a pawn on a6 and the bishop is on b7. So this is not quite a hedgehog. And white now is going for broke on the king side with the pawn storm. Now this is a bit dangerous for white to do because black in the hedgehog has a lot of resources. There are lots of pawn breaks in the hedgehog, which includes e5, it includes d5, sometimes it even includes f5 in positions where you can get a pawn break trying to dissolve the center. Since black doesn't have a6, then there are no b5 breaks, and that's also one of the levers, the pawn levers that you have in a hedgehog. And generally, that queen is not going to be opposing the rook along the file. But this is a different type of position, and we'll see how this plays out in a few moves. E5, there's one of the pawn breaks. The idea is that if you play e5, if pawn takes, then knight takes, and then you'll have a Godzilla knight on e5. And this position would be very precarious for the king, as you have a lot of open space. And so this is a very strong move for black. But white has ideas of his own. Queen h5, g6, queen h6. So now the plan is pretty obvious for white, is that you have a lot of weak squares on the king side. And then you also have potentially an h-file that's going to be a route for the heavy pieces, for the heavy white pieces. Knight e5, bishop e2. Now white is trying to assemble the pieces on the h-file for the attack. Now this is always, just a note here, this bishop g7 and knight f8 move, this is a classic defensive setup for black against an attack. It's putting your knight on f8, your bishop on g7. It covers a lot of squares around the king. So that is kind of one of those classic defensive postures. And there you see it. You notice the squares that are defended by both of these pieces. So all of these squares are defended. Kind of this wall around the king. That did not deter the attack, or did not stifle the attack. As you can see, white is going to be packing up on the h-file. Black tries to run. This is all pretty much expected. Now you have this position. This is the position that we come to. This is the puzzle. So take a couple of minutes to figure out what the solution is. Okay, so the position is obviously one of those that you certainly have to sit on your hands, take your time, and figure out how to finish the game. You're looking at the h-file. The h-file, you know, is key. Is going to be a key to getting to the king. But how do you get to the king before it escapes? Because there is an escape route for the king to try to get to some kind of safety. But of course, Sima Toei is not having it, and he seals the door with queen f6. Killer move. Because the threat now is obvious. The threat is rook h8. And if bishop h8, then the other rook takes and is a mate. So black has to, well, black resigned here. But if black plays bishop f6, then gf6 still seals the door, as these squares are covered and there's no defense to this rook h8. There's no way to interpose. There's no way to protect that square. So that was a nice finish by Sima Toei. Queen f6. You can give that an exclam. finding that move in the blitz game, and that was something to behold. Let's look at the third position. So this is the third position. This is Morris Giles playing Billy Callias. Giles having the black pieces. He has invaded the back rank. And now we'll watch the game from the beginning. Sicilian. This is Scheveningen or Scheveningen. You can actually get to this position from the Najdorf as well. But what makes it a Scheveningen is placing the knight on c6. These are all standard moves that have been seen many times. This c4 developing a bind. If you look at this position, black is solid, but white is slowly building up this attack, this flank attack on the king side, or attempting to position its pieces so that they can swing quickly over to the king side for an assault. And as you can see, you have this queen here, and this rook will hopefully be able to slide over, and then there will be this pressure on the h7 square. a5, queen f2, repositioning the queen. And now you have keeping an eye on c5 just in case black is planning to play d5, the d5 break. Now black plays bishop takes on c3, which is a interesting move because that's one less defender that you have of the king. But this shows how flexible and how resourceful black's position is, because white also has to stop to defend material. Like that e4 pawn is going to be key, because if that falls, now you have a problem and the attack dies. White forges on. Now here, black has a choice of where to move the knight. Do you move it to e4 and hit the rook? And then after maybe rook b3, queen c6? Or do you move it to g4? Which is what happened in the game. Knight g4, bishop takes c5. Now you have a sequence coming up, and Morris had to see this well in advance. He takes on e5, rook h3. Now you have a situation where black is under a lot of pressure. You have a mate threat that's here. He's threatening mate. And you have a situation where this other rook may come over. So there's a lot of pressure. Not only that, this rook is under attack. So he's threatening mate and also the rook. So let's see how the game continues. Black plays h6. Black takes the rook. So if you recapture the rook, you'll just be an exchange down in a lost position. But Morris finds a very interesting response to all of this and all the madness that's going on over the board. He uncorks this. Queen takes b2. Now, obviously, you can't take the queen because rook d1 is mate. But this must have been a cold shower for Callias, because to foresee the mate in the rook is really a lot of foresight. Now, here, the bishop comes back, so you have sacrificed a full rook. So black is a rook down. Queen a1 check. Now, obviously, if you play queen c1, then rook d1 just is winning easily. It wins the queen. So that's not possible. So you have to play bishop g1. Black plays rook d1, hitting the bishop and threatening mate. There's only one way to protect the bishop. You can sack your queen here. That's going to be a losing position. If queen d1, if you play queen d1, then this is just not going to be a tenable position. It's probably the best chance, but I would say black hat would have the advantage here. And you even have pawns that are going to be hard to defend. In hindsight, that might have been his best chance. So he plays queen f2. And here's the position of the puzzle. After queen f2, Morris finds knight g4. Now, the purpose of the queen right now is to hold this bishop. This queen can move anywhere along the diagonal except for the d4 square, which is protected by the rook. So let's say you move to a7, or you move to c5, then you still have the following move. Rook takes g1. Queen takes g1. Knight f2 mate. So that was a nice position, good foresight, where you had knight g4 and leaving your rook hanging. Mate in the rook hanging, h6, taking the rook, and then playing this move. Maybe this should have been the position to find this move. It may have been more obvious to see that you had to play on the back rank, but yeah, that was certainly a gem. And then to being a rook down, queen a1, bishop g1, rook d1, hitting the bishop, queen f2, knight g4, and then finishing the game this way. It was a nice finish to the game. And Morris Giles would win a number of state tournaments. He did not travel outside of Illinois that much, but he played in that U.S. Open in Boston and scored a very good result. I believe he must have been staying with his brother during that tournament. And we certainly missed Morris in the Chicago scene. Morris used to play in the Chicago Industrial Chess League, and I also participated. I played with the Argonne National Laboratory team, and I met him. Well, not met him, but I played some games with him at the banquet, at the end of the season banquet, and you get all of the awards, the team awards, the individual awards. And I played him a couple of blitz games, and they were Najdorfs. And I played the Bishop G5 line, and we get into the main line, and I played Knight D5, sacking the knight. And he misplayed the line, but I didn't play the right follow up, and I ended up losing. But it was just interesting because I can tell he wanted to see how strong I was because he knew about me, but he wanted to see. That was our first interaction with us actually playing some games, and I really enjoyed the time that I had with him. And it was only a short time that I had that interaction with him, but I used to see him at tournaments, and he would always have his cigarettes in his pocket, and but he was very quiet and a very humble individual, and but really ferocious. Really had a very powerful style of play, and so that is Morris Giles. The last position is indeed my favorite. This is my favorite puzzle of the four because I'm an attacking player and I like sacks and I like, to assert my will over the board. But there was a period of time where I started studying endings, and it really opened up my mind to chess because you can crush somebody, you can sack, and it's nice, and you feel good about it. But there's nothing like a finesse, playing finesse moves, and being able to play a combination in the ending is really gratifying. And you see this position here with Warren Elliott, and you look at the position and you see that black is a pawn up. Now, it's temporary because if you look at these pawns here, they're in danger. Both of these pawns are in danger, and if white wanted to, white could take those pawns and then have pass pawns of his own. But it's black to move, and black has to find a way to get out of this situation. And but there's pressure on the D file, and so you now have to figure out a way to make use of whatever advantages you think you have. And you also see that you have a rook over on h8, and you have pawns that are overextended. You have a rook here. All right, here's the game between Assad and Elliott at the 2000 Olympiad. Warren is playing the black pieces. So they end up transposing into a Najdorf. And this is all standard play here so far. Very theoretical. The thing is that black has to be very, very careful because any misstep and black is going to be in deep trouble. It's easy to get moves transposed and end up being in deep trouble. White's pieces are placed very aggressively, but black is very solid and will begin probing the position. So black has started queenside expansion and gets in the thematic d5. This is also a thematic uh, push to g6 to strike at this square, the e6 square. So you have quite a bit of pressure here around the king. Now the king is exposed. It seems like white should have something here. Probably misplayed it somewhere. f5. Now obviously putting pressure here. Warren is trying to remain solid. Now this rook is going to be entombed for a long time. Again, white seems to have a big advantage here. It's hard to understand what happened here. But Warren is fighting. One of the players he admires is Veselin Topalov, who's also a very fierce fighter. And so you can see Warren has taken that influence and made it his own. But he's still in a bit of trouble here. Looking at the position, and if you ever have to play a move like Rook H7, then you know things are bad. Warren is holding on. Just seems like there are so many focal points here with G7, D7, and obviously the knight is pent because of the rook. And then you look at this piece over here, it's very sick. So how did black win this game? Now, white trades queens, which is quite a surprise, but when you're in a position of advantage, you probably shouldn't trade queens. So I guess he felt he would win in the end, but is now a clear pawn down. Now the rook actually repositions itself, and this is the key position. But if you look at this position closer, black has a resource, a tactical resource here. So I want you to take a few minutes, look at the position, and see what you come up with. And see if you can come up with the solution to the end. So in this position, Warren Elliott is playing for the Jamaican national team. It's a team event, the Chess Olympiad in 2000. So you're playing not for yourself, you're playing for your team. So this tense game, in the ending, Warren finds this resource. 95. You have to give this a double exclam, not just a single. And you'll figure this out as we go on and you see the solution. You will understand why I would give this a double exclam. Black is sacrificing a knight, of course. And if you take the knight, then obviously there's this small detail, this rook. So, would you win the exchange? What would be the situation when the smoke clears? Well, let's find out. Knight takes e5, rook takes, king takes, knight f7 check. So you're going to pick up this rook in the corner, but black has seen a bit further and plays king e6. Now you can see what the plan is. The plan is to get this pawn rolling, and knights tend to be very clumsy in catching pawns on the flank. It's very difficult, and Warren had that figured out. So we continue on. Pawn takes, knight g6, which is forced. You don't have any time to waste because that pawn is going to be sprinting to the g1 square for a queen. But Warren plays another star move. King f6. This cuts off white's ability to get back. So all of these squares are taken. So it means that white really is going to have a hard time getting around and fronting the pawn. The only other way that you can try to stop the pawn is to move the king. Try to get the king to defend the g1 square. But as you all know, if you know your in-game lessons, that you'll know that that king is too far because it would be out of this square. There's an imaginary square, this square here, that once that pawn reaches, this king has to be inside this square in order to catch it. But first, white has to move the knight. Knight f8, g4. The white king is not inside the square, so it will not be able to catch the pawn. So that means somehow the knight has to find a way to come all the way around and catch the pawn before it hits g1. Knight d7 check, king f5. Knight b6, hoping that you can somehow get to a square where you can fork the pawn and the king. g3. Now you go knight to d5. If g2, then you have this move. Now white wins, actually. But of course, Warren did not come all of this way just to botch a beautiful sacrifice and plays king e4. Again, shouldering the knight off of the defense of the g1 square. All these squares are covered. So check, king f3, and resign. So that was in my eyes, that was a position that I appreciated because it took a lot of foresight. And you had to see this pretty far. Imagine this. You had to see this well in advance. You even had to see how that king would shoulder the knight and escort the pawn up the board. So this was a very deep calculation by Warren. And we'll just go through it again. 95 takes, and you get the rook in the corner, but the pawn runs, and you shoulder the knight away. The knight tries to go around and is going to try some trickery, but this closes the deal. And in this position, white resigned.